You're listening to The Riff, a podcast by North Point Church. There's a lot more to the Christian journey than what can be presented in a 30-minute time slot from a stage on Sunday morning. Our host and lead pastor, Jeremy Johnson, highlights the vision of North Point Church and the Christian journey through stories, interviews, and unfiltered faith ramblings. We hope the conversations will help you engage in how faith interacts with your life. I think we're ready. Let's go for it.
Oh my word. I am glad you joined us today. And Justin and I sit down and have a conversation, and Justin asked a couple of questions that got me going about politics, Christianity, and North Point. And so I'm just going to apologize in advance for Justin's questions as we dive into something I think is so important. So if you're not into awkwardness, this would be your time to exit the ride and go right through the gift shop. But if you're along for this ride, let's go for it. I think this is so important, and a lot of props, no matter where you land politically, your perspectives, whether you're in agreement with what I have to say or not. If you can make your way through this thing, I think it'd be helpful for all of us. So let's dive in. Thanks for listening. All right. Well, we are back with another episode of The Riff.
Oh, man. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
This one's going to be good.
Here's the deal.
What?
We never know that.
No. But this one's it.
How about this? We can say this one will be better.
I don't know.
That's probably safe.
Okay. All right.
That's probably safe.
This is another one.
We're going to do our best.
That's good.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for joining us, if you are. So,
well, hey, we're going to talk about a couple things in this one. We get questions a lot from people listening to the podcast. By the way, you can ask questions to the podcast. We'll put that in the show notes. You can also go to the website on the Next Steps page, and you can find the riff, and you can actually put in some questions. Like, I know one of them is, why does Jeremy smile so much? That's an FAQ, frequently asked
when you got
question.
Teeth like this, why don't you show those off, baby?
But one of the things that comes up a lot, especially in this climate and especially within these past few years, are a couple things. One of them would be, are politics an essential in Christianity? What does that look like? What is an evangelical and why is it so mad? And how do you deal with mean people? We've seen a lot of people, we saw all people leave the church during COVID as pieces were shut down. And as people start to come back and gather again, you see a lot of people being hesitant to gather, yes, for medical pieces, but also for ideological reasons. And I don't want to be around that guy or that girl is kind of a theme. So we want to walk through that, and okay. I want to get your take on it as you lead a church. And in these times, I don't think we've done this before. I don't know.
I've not.
Okay, great, cool. So I just want to get your thoughts on it, and I want to see what your thoughts are. So the first question, man, is like, seriously, are politics an essential to Christianity? And when I say politics, I mean American politics as we see them today, because I know that we talk a lot about Jesus and empire and all of that, and that we're probably Egypt, blah, blah, blah. But
yeah,
what is that?
Let's identify our listeners in a hurry. So my quick answer is no, they are not. So let me take some time to talk to the people who already disagree with me. Christianity seemed to do just fine when it wasn't in bed with politics. From the beginning of Christianity to the first couple hundreds of years, persecution, and when I say persecution, I'm talking about like real persecution, not having to lay aside preferences. So this is the riff, right? We can just go unfiltered.
So yeah, I just want to know what you wanted to say, because I feel like
I'm still filtered. Okay, here's the deal. We're not being persecuted. We are not being persecuted. And when we have to lay down our preferences, we have to wear a mask. We have to not gather in a social setting when nobody's gathering in a social setting. That's not persecution. Persecution is when they are taking our sons and daughters, impaling them, gassing them, lighting them on fire as the street lights. That's Rome. That's Nero. That's persecution. And it is an absolute insult to the cause of Christ and an insult to the history of Christianity to say that we're being persecuted in America in the 21st century. So that's my unfiltered
That was way more unfiltered
thoughts.
Than preference.
So
that was way more. And yeah, keep going.
So Politics is not essential to Christianity. As a matter of fact, Christianity thrives better when politics isn't in the mix. When Christianity got the political stamp of approval from Constantine, and it became not only legal to be a Christian, eventually illegal to not be a Christian. It's amazing what power did to Christianity. Political power and preferential power has rarely enhanced the good news of Jesus Christ. It typically just emboldens the passion of those who claim to be Christians and makes them less effective, less attractive for Jesus, but quicker in their stance to get people there. And so that's when we end up painting crosses on shields and saying convert or die. And some of our worst days of Christian history were when we had the biggest power politically. So quick answer is no. It can be helpful when the politics at play allow us the freedom of worship. Absolutely helpful. I am a fan of freedom of worship. I am not afraid of a lack of freedom to worship. I'm not. I prefer freedom to worship. If it was illegal to worship, I'm not afraid. I don't think it changes the end course. I will do everything possible to take advantage of freedoms. Anyway, so that's where politics is. So evangelical is interesting. Evangelical Christianity is a term that became popular in the latter half of the 20th century and is actually very much tied to politics. It's when evangelism is a word that we get from a Greek word that just means spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. So it's when you tell the good story of a good God who makes all things right. That's you're the postal carrier with that message. You're the Paul Revere with a good message. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. It's good news for everybody. That's the image that the Bible writes about evangelism. An evangelical is rarely described as a smiling person. An evangelical Christian is typically nowadays aligned with someone who is mad that any preference would be stripped, and we would never call it preference because that doesn't sound spiritual, so we would call it freedom. So they would be the vanguard for the freedoms of religious liberty, which I'm all a fan of religious liberty. But sometimes evangelical Christians have to create an enemy so that they can have fuel for their cause. And so usually it's fear. It was fear of the communists in the 80s. Before that, it was fear of family values by women going to work. And so evangelical Christianity said, this is going to be the end of Christianity if we allow some women's liberties across the board. That was their fear, that it was they have to attach that to our ultimate Christian value. And so we fight this, then we fight the communists, and then we can fight a lot of different things. Some things could be neutral, some things good, some things bad, but it always has to have an enemy that we can see so that we have a spiritual reason to defend a lot of times a faith preference that we want.
That's an interesting way to put it. I've throughout the years, somebody has called me an evangelical or said that. I've never I've tried to define it and I can't. Like I'll even look it up, like WebMD style of like, do I have that? Is that where? So that's an interesting take because I've never. You can't find like the Webster Dictionary. Well, you might. I don't know. I didn't look it up, but it's hard to define evangelical. Right. But in our climate, it's looked at as a evangelicalism. Evangelicals are mad at something, which would make sense if you're talking about a fear-based piece.
Yeah, I mean, and really evangelical, whoever gets the evangelical vote since the 70s on in the presidential race wins. And so presidents typically are aware of that and will do a lot to win the evangelical vote by inviting evangelical voices. The most influential evangelical voices go back to Billy Graham, And when Billy Graham has the most influence over this huge voting block, if Billy Graham has the ability to give some influence on some of the hot topics of the day, he's going to carry all these votes with him. President hopefuls know that, and it continues nowadays. And so whoever has that evangelical vote has a leg up on the competition. Now, evangelicalism, am I an evangelical pastor? I would say probably yes when you say theological definition of I believe in Scripture. I believe Scripture is the authority of my life when interpreted correctly. I believe in these values that a lot of evangelicals would be very loud about. I believe in a very conservative, probably traditional, less government type of conservative. I would probably fit in a lot of those camps. But evangelical doesn't necessarily mean that anymore. It's really talking about a culture, which is an us versus them culture. And I completely am not in an us versus them culture. I do not believe the world is evil. I believe that God loves the world. There are bad interpretations of Scripture make us think the world is evil. The truth is the world is us. It's amazing evangelical people love their nation so much but hate their national leaders. That's always been odd to me. And so what we need to understand is our target audience is to bring hope and wholeness to those around us. And the evangelical culture right now seems to be this angry person who's just yelling at everyone to get off their lawn and hoping God comes back. And the evangelical voice has blamed. You could watch videos of the evangelical leaders blaming bad things on the evil around us, blaming whether it's COVID on the behaviors of our politicians, or blaming the hurricanes on the moral decay of what happens on a part of the city in their eyes. And so what happens is evangelical culture thrives when you can attach bad behavior to God's judgment. Now, do I believe God judges us? Yes. Do I believe I'm a part of that judgment because of my own decisions? Yes. The grace of God should actually make the story of Jesus good news. And ironically, evangelical Christianity is often bad news to the ones they're supposed to be good news for.
It's interesting. So I think a question that would be asked would be, you've definitely found yourself, if you are going to church, if you're a North Pointer, in a situation to where those pieces and those definitions are way easier to see than they were previously. Meaning, I can see your social feed. I can see how you interact with other people on social specifically. And I can now define you before I meet you.
Yes.
Right? So talk to the people out there that don't want to come back to a church setting because they've gathered this idea, and it might be true, and it might not. I don't know, that I've defined this group of people because of what I've seen. I want no part of it. So you're saying no to so many things based upon what is the loudest right now. So talk to that person, the person that's listening to this podcast somehow and still hasn't come back, not for a medical reason, but for an ideological reason of like, I cannot be around, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, those people.
Yeah, I want to understand, because I ask myself the same thing every time I look at social media or receive an email that would be from the lens of angry, mad, us versus them ideology. You said something interesting that I think is true. Here's what I've learned from my seat in COVID. And I don't assume that my job is harder than a lot of you listening. Your job, COVID has made a lot of jobs tough because it's made life tough on a lot of people. And so but from my seat, it is unique. In the church, it's impacted us a lot because before COVID, what united us was a mission. We're here to reach people. People love the thought like, man, I'm surrounded by people who don't agree with me politically. They don't have the same background as me, but we create a safe place for people to find and follow Jesus. We love it because we didn't have an environment or a need. We weren't in a war. And so people didn't have to say what they believed, and they didn't have to join an echo chamber. And what happened with whether it was George Floyd's death, whether it was the political presidential race last fall, whether it was the events of January 6th, whether it was the impact of COVID and masking, is people rarely enjoyed the tension of the middle ground. And so we lost that. The beauty of North Point has always been this tension between this polarized church climate, that we weren't anti the world and we weren't like trying to cram church culture. But now there's a polarization politically, there's a polarization medically, there's a polarization spiritually, all these things. And so we're in danger of having a middle ground mission. And our mission, middle ground, is not wishy-washy. Middle ground is not lacking convictions.
Okay, so yeah, keep going on that piece, because I want to know, you hear a lot, like, you got to take your stand somewhere.
And you'll hear that from one of the sides.
Yeah.
The polarization, because here's the deal, the polarization is going to say, if your pastor isn't standing up right now and saying abortion's evil and too many people are being killed, then your pastor doesn't have a backbone. And I'd be like, and so people email me this, how come we don't do this? I'd be like, have you heard of something called the Pregnancy Care Center? One of our favorite sponsors who give people in a loving way every opportunity at life. We've always been for them. We always will be for them. But at the same time, we're also dealing with every week someone whose most painful moment was they just had an abortion. And for me to say it in a careless way absolutely destroys the opportunity for them to hear about the good news. And am I for life? Absolutely for life. Are we going to partner with every opportunity and resource to bring life options to people? Yes. Do you want me to be a jackass and stand up there and say, if you ever disagreed with this philosophy, you shouldn't be at North Point? No. Now, at the same time, people will be on the other side and say, hey, if you speak on racism, man, there's an agenda with Black Lives Matter, and you're for Black Lives Matter. I got to be honest with you. I'm not aware that we've ever invested a penny in an organization called Black Lives Matter, but let me be very clear. Black lives matter. And I don't need to justify it by giving another race. Here's the deal. God is always on the side of the oppressed. He's always on the side of the oppressed. And that sounds great until we're the oppressor. And the moment we're the oppressor, we hate that, and we will want to then have an echo chamber in our ears that say no, because that's a slippery slope. And all of a sudden now you're going to, your faith community is now focused on social justice and not biblical justice. And I got to tell you, North Point will be a place where we will be a voice for the oppressed. We will be a voice for life. And we haven't changed the message at North Point. What's happened is the context upon which we share this message has become so polarized that people are less receptive. And people who thought they liked our message, all of a sudden now, if they have to make a decision. Am I more passionate about the politics behind the issue or the real issue? Am I more passionate? Like, honestly, do you think for a second I like MASH? No.
You look great in them, though.
I look better in them. I know that. But I don't love masks. I'm not the voice of vaccine, right? But when our community leaders come to us and say, hey, for some reason, the place in America with the highest percentage of church attendance and evangelical Christians is also the place that's the least likely to get vaccinated. Can you at least help strip the fear that it's a faith issue, like a routine faith issue? And to me, I'm like, for sure. I don't believe everyone needs to be vaccinated. I don't care. I don't believe everyone needs to wear a mask. I don't care. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a scientist. But I also believe it's not a routine faith issue that you can't because you're a Christian. And a lot of people think it does. And in our community, we have spiritual leaders who are saying that it's a spiritual issue. And if you get the vaccine, then you're living a fear-based life. And if you wear a mask, that you're not honoring God. That's crazy talk. And so what I'm trying to do is say, hey, let's just address some of these issues that don't have to be faith issues. And when I do that, people will say, hey, that's a political move. I'm not a political dude. I'm not That's not what it is. But bottom line, why does this land? And so it splits hairs. Okay. Here's the deal. It's because we're in a polarized setting. If we go back 3 years and we said, hey, there was a gas leak over at City Utilities for the next 3 weeks, we got to wear masks. No one thinks that I'm on the side of the Antichrist. But because a Democrat says it, Republicans might think that I just took the mark of the beast, right? And I'm not letting Democrats off the hook either, because it'd be the same way if Trump told us to do it and I said yes, because we tend to be polarized. Here's what has made North Point great over the years. Before I got here and after I'll be done being here, is it's not a place for Democrats or Republicans or evangelicals or postmoderns. It's a place for those interested to check out the claims of Scripture and invite, what if this is true? What, God, can you show up in my life? And what if you've had crazy situations in your life that don't make political sense, don't make church sense, but you had the courage to show up despite that, and you found hope with people who are different from you? We have to have the courage to walk away from our echo chambers and embrace this tension of, I don't even know what you believe about all these side issues, but I do believe you're on my team on this main issue of let's bring hope and wholeness to this issue. Here's the other challenge. For those of you who might be listening, you might know fully what people believe and you don't like it. And people are being weird about how they believe. And that might make you mad. I just want you to know, you leaving isn't going to help us find our safe middle again. Not our safe middle, our unsafe middle of tension. We need both sides. I need people who are very uncomfortable with government, and I need people who are very uncomfortable with evangelicals to find a way to let's both hold up this mission, because it's never been political. We don't want it to be political. We need to go forward. Our community needs to see a group of people who are not bound by their political beliefs, not even bound by their church backgrounds, but they're bound by this hope that God is up to something today. And we put down anything that divides us and we walk forward in unity with the essentials. We just got to redefine the essentials.
That's good. What's a practical step that somebody can take, whether it be a practice, whether it be something that they're doing? What's the next step for somebody that finds themselves in that, have listened to that, and they're like, oh, that's what I feel. Oh, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. What's a step?
I would say on both sides of the issue. I would say you're not crazy. You might feel crazy, and you might feel the other side is crazy. This season is crazy, and that's all right. I want to give you grace. I want to give you permission, and I've done the same thing for myself, to untie myself from the things I've passionately said in the past. Right? I will never go back to this place, or I will never be friends with this person. I've felt that before, and I have to untie myself from promises that aren't going to help. And so if you're here and you haven't come back, I would say you don't need to come back to North Point to be fully alive, and I get that. I would hope that North Point could be helpful in that journey. And for my sake, since I'm here, I certainly hope that this is a place you'd choose to come back to if you land on the mission. If you want to hijack our mission and for the next couple of years make it a political deal, no, go somewhere else. Not because we don't like you or we don't like your politics, because that's not the mission. So I would just say, lean forward. Give people grace that they're being loud, probably because they're unsure. And we oftentimes, when we're most uncertain, we act the most certain. And this is a time where we don't know. I would have never guessed we're still dealing with this.
That's the story of church for me growing up, right? I mean, that is the story of just church before COVID, before all of this uncertainty. Like church for me was always off-putting because it seems so certain. And I'm like, you don't know. You don't know. There was never an opportunity to ask questions. Yeah. And I would think that's important. Like, for me, like on my side, like just asking, why do you think this? Your whole fascinating thing, we've talked about that in podcasts. is helpful.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Help me understand how you see your world.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I still can't see it, right? But I want to know more. Right? We ask these questions. I think that's helpful. Here's what we've resisted with the DNA of North Point in the past. This arrogance that comes along with certainty. And we talked about this back when we did a podcast on miracles, and we talked about certainty of here's how God's going to do this. Certainty is not attractive at all, but this wild wonder of what God might be up to. And here's what's tough for me. If you have certainty in your politics and passion, we should be passionate about our politics, right? Like we should be passionate about the policies. I'm passionate about my policies in my house, right? But that doesn't give me permission to be arrogant or mean. I mean, Matthew chapter 5 is the Beatitudes. In Matthew chapter 5 talks about, here's what our message should be. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they'll be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they'll be shown mercy. Blessed are pure in heart, they'll see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they'll be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. I don't think we are yet. Maybe we will be. But even if we were, that shouldn't make us mad. If those who even think we're being persecuted, we should be like, well, that's a shortcut to a blessing because now mine's the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. It says, rejoice and be glad. We live in a time right now where a lot of people say a bunch of bad things about us or people we love, and we just have to develop these muscles of merciful, meek, humble. It's not weakness, it's controlled strength. And then to say, okay, I can rejoice in this. Here's what we need. North Point needs, not for us to check out our minds and hey, let's just be trampling mats for Jesus and give up any religious rights. That's not what we're saying. I think it's an issue if Springfield came out with an ordinance that everybody could gather. You can go to all the Missouri State Bears games and Juanita Hammond's concerts. You can gather, but if it's a church and you're going to gather about Jesus, no, you can't. Then I would say, hey, let's talk to some friends who know law, and let's see if we have this persecution there. Even how I handle that, I'm commanded by God to do it with joy and meekness. So we're not even close to that. If we were there, I still have to behave in such a way as Matthew 5-ish. Here's what I'm seeing from a lot of us. We're not acting Matthew 5-ish, and we're not even having the persecution described in Matthew 5. What would ever happen? We're going to lose our credibility before we ever see real persecution. Will we see persecution? For sure. If I said no, then that's a very Western civilization mentality, because there are people right now in different countries who are facing real persecution. And let's not waste our influence with fake persecution or mock persecution. Let's learn how to handle meekness and loving and kindness. So all I have to say is North Point needs people to be engaged. I think we should be engaged politically. I think we should be engaged in school boards and homeowners associations. Should we have influence? I hope you do. Most of us, right? Like some of us, maybe not, but most of us, if we're becoming more like Jesus, I pray that God puts you in places of influence and helps you impact and bring wholeness.
Yeah.
But do we need is a certain American political party? No, we don't need that. So what we need involved, influential people who are going to become more like Jesus, less arrogant, more peace-loving, more kind.
It's good, man. It's good. It's so I think we've solved it.
Yeah,
I think the 28 minutes that we just spent on that,
yeah.
I feel like next week should be great.
I would say this, though, North Pointers who find yourself, for whatever reason, louder than maybe you feel comfortable with after listening to a podcast like this, that's all right. You're all right. You're good. There's no shame. But invite Jesus to Matthew 5, that mentality. For those of you who have found yourself isolated during this time and felt like you lost your church because this vision of what you thought was a part, all of a sudden you see, man, there's a lot of flaws in the people that I was locking arms with. Isn't that what North Point's all about? We've all got lots of flaws. So come on, let's do this. Let's come back together. Let's create this tension in the middle ground. And I think, especially in Springfield, Missouri area, people will be like, how do they do that? Let's figure that out.
That's great, man. That's great. And one other thing that in my mind, it's so interesting, a couple of things that you were saying. In my mind, when I read the New Testament, there are two definitely visions and versions of Jesus. You have Jesus of the Gospels and Jesus of Revelation. And I feel like in tension and trial, we love to focus on Jesus with a sword. And when that isn't happening, we love Jesus on the cross. So what's in between? And that's the question, man. So thanks for walking through this, man. I know this is not an easy piece. It's not an easy piece to walk through, lead through. But appreciate your words on it.
Let's take another step.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Riff. Submit a question for the podcast at northpointchurch.tv/podcast. We'll have a brand new episode every week, wherever you find podcasts.